I applaud you for being among the most committed in that you are here at the proper start time, and I thank you for that. I recognize many faces in the audience, but I also see some new folks, and that's very encouraging. We want to continue growing the conservation community and growing our movement and our family of committed, educated individuals. And so welcome. If this is your first Virginia Conservation Network event, we're glad to have you. We hope it won't be your last. My name, for those of you whom I haven't met, is Nathan Lott. I'm Executive Director of Virginia Conservation Network. So we're the presenters at this event. We have many partners. In fact, we have 125 or more partner organizations within our network, and we work together closely on environmental conservation throughout the state of Virginia at every level, local, state, and federal. But our focus today is going to be at the state level and at the General Assembly in particular. This is our opportunity to get a preview of what's ahead in January when the General Assembly reconvenes. They'll be meeting right here in the Capitol building and offices just up the hill of the General Assembly building. And they'll be dealing with a lot of issues, a lot of contentious issues, and a lot of issues that we care about. So this is our opportunity to educate ourselves and to be ready. So I thank you for making the time to do that, and I'm certain that it's going to be time well spent. So behind me you see the image that was on the postcard. Part of it was on the postcard we mailed out. If you didn't get the postcard, that means you're not on our mailing list. So I hope you will sign up in the room across the hall in House Room 3 so that we can keep you abreast. Most of what we do by email, obviously, saving trees and carbon. And you can pick up our brochure while you're over there. This image is a bit of a joke, intended to be eye-catching, but it's not entirely tongue-in-cheek. We really do have some big metaphorical fights ahead of us this year, and it's time for us to find our green gloves and strap them on and be ready for these fights. The interests against which we find ourselves aligned are definitely itching for a fight. That's our mission statement. Reads like mom and apple pie. It's hard to believe anybody would disagree with that. If we want to conserve our Commonwealth's natural resources and ensure its future prosperity. But when we get right down to it, there are certainly different interpretations of how to go about that, of how to create future prosperity. And I, as a father of 2 kids, I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. When I think about the Commonwealth's future prosperity, I'm thinking about my son and daughter. And is this going to be a safe place for them to live? Is it going to be the sort of place where they would choose to go to school and choose to spend their younger years in careers and build a career here? So what's our economy going to look like, and what's our quality of life going to look like when my kids are my age or when they're in their early 20s and trying to decide, is this the state that they want to live in? And that's kind of the paradigm with which I approach a lot of conservation issues. What is going to be the impact in 20 years? Unfortunately, a lot of people approach issues, economic and otherwise, in terms of what's going to be the impact in 6 months or 2 years or 3 years. And we are up against people who are thinking in very short-term horizons. And it's our job to make the case for long-term thinking. I think that's probably true across all of the issues that we're going to talk about today. And being as I have kids, I wanted to start out with this picture, which many of you will probably recognize from a beloved children's book, Are You My Mother? So oftentimes, I think this is how they see us. We're the little bird, and we're yelling at the steam shovel. And we're telling it, no, don't destroy this, don't destroy that. And we are dealing in Virginia with some very powerful and very entrenched corporate interests. And in many ways, this is true. We are the little bird yelling at the big machine. And they are fine with the birds as long as we stay off the work site. If you remember this book, the steam shovel puts the bird back in the nest at the end. And a lot of the folks with whom we find ourselves butting heads are not antithetical to the things we care about. They just don't want our concern for wildlife, our concern for clean water and clean air in the way of business. They want us to stay off the work site. And otherwise, we can get along just fine. But the fact is, there is a culture in Virginia of extractive industry that goes back hundreds of years. It goes back to the founding of the Commonwealth, and a view of natural resources as limitless and as ours to use inexhaustibly for personal gain, for corporate and run into a wall. We probably ran into the wall 100 years ago, and we can't continue doing that. We simply can't continue to view our natural resources as inexhaustible and as the basis of our economy in Virginia. But these are entrenched interests, and they're particularly entrenched in the political sphere, and that goes across party lines. We are in House room now, so I'll say it's probably actually worse in the Senate than it is in the House in terms of the degree in which corporate interests influence elected officials in Virginia. And that's why the work that we're about today is so important. The other thing that we're up against, in addition to entrenched corporate interest and a mentality that says natural resources are for our limitless use without consideration of my kid's future, is this phenomena of what I call the death of civil discourse. And this is really not unique to Virginia. It may not even be as bad in Virginia as it is in other places, but it's driven by globalization and nationalization in the media that people receive. There's an obsession with national issues and national divisions which overshadow everything. They overshadow local politics and state politics, and we saw that in the recent elections when what people were talking about and debating in the 2011 elections in Virginia was very often something in D.C. or something on MSNBC or Fox News. And they were not talking about state issues, and they were not talking about the restoration of Chesapeake Bay or the best way to create jobs in Southside and Southwest Virginia. They were talking about Obamacare or cap and trade. And that makes it extremely difficult for us to engage the political process, engage the policy-making process, and difficult for us to get our friends and neighbors to care about what happens in this building. And that's a structural phenomenon that's going to be with us, I think, for at least the next decade. So we might throw the bones out in 2 years and have a completely different set of lawmakers in Virginia, but we're still going to have to deal with this nationalization of information, and I think this partisan rancor that's probably here to stay. Another change of note, we've not only seen more divisiveness in our politics, but we have, in part for that reason, seen the retirement of several of our conservation champions in the General Assembly, some of whom I think didn't want to be part of that divisiveness and didn't want to go back on the campaign trail and have to fight in an environment that is so bitter and so divided. And those were conservation champions of both parties we saw retire this past year. Harvey Morgan, Patsy Teister, Albert Pollard, Mary Margaret Whipple. So we are now in need of a new breed of, or a new generation of legislative champions here in this building. And I think we have definitely some friends and allies and some people on our short list of potential champions, but we need constituents like you talking to their lawmakers about how important our issues are in order to cultivate this new breed of this new generation of legislative champions. So some of that is what we're up against. And I think it's something we're going to be up against, as I said, probably for the next decade. So what's our path to victory? I've been thinking a lot about this lately. I think that there are basically three things that we have to have if we're going to win on what are fundamentally centrist issues in this political environment and in this upcoming General Assembly. First of all, we have to be right. So we have to be smart. We need to be right mathematically. We also need to be right morally. We need to take the high ground. And I think we do a good job of that. I think sometimes we're tempted to make the facts fit our ideals, and we don't need to do that. We need to have the facts on our side and be sure that we are grounded in them. And I'm proud to say I think we do that really well. We need to be unified, and we need to be a better network. And that is part of our mission at Virginia Conservation Network. No single environmental organization is capable of impacting the policy-making process in Virginia in this climate and environment. So even the largest groups of National Wildlife Federation and Chesapeake Bay Foundation have recognized that working together is absolutely paramount if we're going to have any impact in this political climate. And thirdly, I think we need to be working on policy year-round. Talking about that partisan rancor, campaigns have become a 24/7, 365-day affair. We've seen, just at the tail end of the last election, now we're talking about who's going to run for governor. Is it going to be Cuccinelli? Is it going to be Bowling? Who's going to be the Democrats? So we have perpetual campaign cycle. And for those of us that are concerned less with campaigns than we are with public policy, we need to recognize that we need to have a perpetual public policy initiative as well. We can't just think about public policy as something we're going to do 2 months out of the year when the General Assembly is in town. We need to be working on these issues year-round, and that's absolutely critical. And I think these things are going to be true over not just this next year, but over this next decade. So the image you see there is a little internal diagram we use to explain how Virginia Conservation Network weaves together our 125 affiliate partners, and we set our priorities and we set the policy. We do that through work groups and a legislative committee, and also through a staff and volunteer board. So first we set our common agenda, and that's what we're going to talk about today. That's the meat of this workshop. We do that through 5 working groups. They meet monthly. As I said, working year-round has become critical. They're drafting the white papers that you received today in your conservation briefing book. And they're also doing regulatory watchdogging. They're looking at agencies to see how laws are being implemented, making sure that good laws on the books are not being undercut within their implementation within state agencies. And they're increasingly building campaigns. And we'll talk some about those. Keep the Ban campaign, Choose Clean Water campaign. Spinning off our policy expertise to do public outreach as a way of making our policy work a 24/7, 365-day endeavor. We also have our legislative committee, which is made of at least 20 experts drawn out of those work groups, and they're meeting twice a week during the General Assembly session. So they are your voice here in Richmond, but I can tell you, every one of them would say to you, we need you. You are more valuable than us. So we do have a team of lobbyists working for the conservation community in this building and uphill at the General Assembly building throughout the legislative session. And many of them are your presenters here today. So be sure to pull them aside if you have questions about our legislative committee process. But they assess legislation and they make recommendations, and that information we make available to you via our website, right there, vcnva.org, throughout the General Assembly session. You can get the PDF copy of the Conservation Briefing Book, which you received today in your packets. I encourage you to go there, find that information, send an email with a link to your friends and say, hey, I got this great publication, I learned about all these conservation issues. Here's the web version, check it out. Maybe there's something here that you care deeply about, you want to educate yourself about. You'll also find, just launched on our website, the Advocates Toolbox. And that's the icon you see on the screen. This is a place for people who are just starting out in citizen activism. They want to learn, how do I determine who my legislator is? How do I learn what's appropriate for setting up a meeting and when and where to lobby? What should I expect? We've got everything there. It's the soup to nuts of how to be an effective citizen advocate. And we put that together to share with all of our affiliate partner organizations so that they can put this information up on their websites as well, and we can really engage and enlist an army of concerned citizens, because we think that's what it's going to take to make a difference over the next decade. And of course, in addition to our virtual work on our website, we do events like this one, because we do think it's extremely valuable to have people face-to-face and have conversations and be networking together, concerned citizens. And we're doing that year-round. Our next big event that I want to flag for you is Conservation Lobby Day. And because you're here today, I hope you will come back on Conservation Lobby Day, January 23rd, when your senator and delegate will be working at the Capitol, and you'll have a chance to meet with them for their legislative aid in their office with bills already introduced. We'll have specific bill numbers. So all of the concepts we're talking about today, we will know in detail what's on the table, what decisions are really being asked of these lawmakers. And that's a critical time for us to demonstrate that citizens care enough about the decisions being made in this building to come to Richmond, to take a day off of work, some of them, and be here and speak up, not just for the environment, not just for birds and wildlife, but for my kids, for your kids and your grandkids. So January 23rd. And again, if you don't have one of these, or if you've got friends that might like them, pick up a couple off of the table in there. It has information about both this event and Conservation Lobby Day on it. So I'm going to very briefly just talk about some of the issues we're touching on today. And I'm not going to go into detail because we have an excellent set of presentations and great set of workshops teed up. And so those are the folks that are going to be able to answer your questions and give you real detail. And I'm just going to take a very brief overview at our common agenda about what our priorities are going into this General Assembly session, because I know that we've got concurrent workshops and you can't be in two places at once. So you will have to make some decisions. We've oriented our work for the past 2 or 3 years at ECN around 3 proactive priorities, around our vision for Virginia. And our vision for Virginia is healthy rivers, green communities, and clean energy. And we think that if we have those things, Virginia will be the sort of place where my kids will have a prosperous life in 20 years and in 40 years' time. So, beginning with healthy rivers, we think clean water should be the birthright of every Virginian. Clean water coming out of their tap, clean water in the streams behind the house, clean water in state parks, and clean water in Chesapeake Bay. So, to get there, what do we need to do? We need to keep the ban on uranium mining. That's a huge issue from our perspective in the water arena. It touches on many other areas of the environment, and ecology, and quality of life, but water concerns first and foremost around uranium mining. And I'm very proud of the work that our affiliate partners have done in our uranium mining work group to create the Keep the Ban campaign. We decided back in March, we've done a lot of research on this. We're going to continue doing more research. We're going to see more studies, but we can't afford just to be waiting until all the studies are in and all the evidence is in to go public. We have to be out in the public sphere educating people now and be loud and active if we're going to have any chance of influencing the decision-making process. And that's how this Keep the Ban campaign was born. There are some people that accused us of making up our minds too soon, not being open-minded. But I can tell you that the company that wants to mine in Southside Virginia has made up their mind, and they've given $100,000 to lawmakers this year. So we can't afford to be waiting to be right if we're not also being out in front of people and educating them. So the big impacts there, risk to drinking water, as far away as Virginia Beach. And that's just from the one mine that's been proposed. There are other possible mine sites in the Piedmont. We frankly just don't know what's out there because we haven't explored. So the risk to drinking water is huge. There are numerous health effects that could be associated with contaminated drinking water. We know radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer, and we know it's associated with uranium. So it doesn't take a lot of explanation for people to understand that this is seriously toxic stuff, and all sides agree with that. The question is, can it be contained? And that's really our core concern. And I'm going to let Mary Rafferty with Sierra and Kel Jaffe answer a lot of your questions during the uranium mining workshop today. Another major initiative we're concerned with under our Healthy Rivers priority is restoration of rivers in Chesapeake Bay. Many of you probably live on rivers, live on Chesapeake Bay, and care deeply about these resources. They're not just the lifeblood of our ecology in Virginia, but they're also the lifeblood of our economy historically and deeply a part of Virginia's culture. And they ought to be clean. They ought to be thriving with smallmouth bass and with blue crabs and with brook trout and headwaters. And in some places they are, and in some places they're not. We think, as I said, every Virginian deserves clean water. So we're part of the Choose Clean Water campaign, and Jacob Powell, who's going to present at our pollution trading workshop, is managing that campaign in Virginia and doing a great job of it. We're working with the coalition across 5 states on total maximum daily load for Chesapeake Bay. He can tell you what that stands for, or he can tell you what that means in practice, all of the sweep acronyms, WHIPs, and TMDLs. But in essence, this is about having clean streams from the headwaters down to the main stem of Chesapeake Bay. And we're going to get there. We know how to get there, but it's not going to be cheap. It's not going to be easy. And there's going to have to be a shared burden across the watershed, from agriculture to suburbs to wastewater treatment plants. It's not rocket science, but it's also not going to be cheap, and that's part of the real challenge we face. And the answer some people have to that cost challenge is nutrient trading, and that's why we're talking about it today. It's a big part of the governor and this administration's prescribed prescribed solution, but the devil is very much in the details on that issue. And if you care about clean rivers and clean water, I encourage you to educate yourself about the nutrient trading issue. Second priority, green communities. All Virginians deserve healthy places to live and work. I think we can all agree with that. And I think we can all agree that having healthy places to live and work is critical for our success economically, for the education of our children, and for our quality of life. So what does that mean? Well, that means smarter growth, better development, not spending money we don't need to spend on infrastructure at the edges of our communities, but keeping our communities healthy and vibrant. If you don't recognize this picture, this is Fort Monroe. So I've included it here as this is a success story in terms of smart growth and green communities. There's a community there that has been there historically, really almost since the founding of English settlements in America, and it's going to be preserved, a large portion of it, as a national park. We're still working to preserve the remainder of it, but it's going to be a conservation success story, and we hope that it will be an engine for smart growth and redevelopment throughout Hampton. But many of the tools that we use for better development in Virginia, many of which we have just, in fact, put on the books in the past administration, Governor Kane, are under attack. And they're under attack from a wing of the Tea Party, not the entire Tea Party, but a subset of it, that is convinced that better development is somehow socialist. That having a planning commission decide whether or not rezoning is appropriate is somehow a plot from the United Nations to take over our countryside and give all of the land to wildlife and take away from people. So it really is, very conspiratorial, the thinking of this subset of the Tea Party. But they've got an outsized influence, just as the Tea Party itself has an outsized influence. Newt Gingrich has admitted that he just recently learned about Agenda 21, and he's real concerned about it. Newt's supposed to be the smart one in the race. So we got to take this stuff seriously, and they've decided that urban development areas, which have been on the books now for 4 years or so, are part of the communist plot to take our countryside away from people and give it to wildlife. And it's laughable, because we know, many of us who advocated for urban development areas and who advocated for better development, we know that this was a bipartisan idea, that Republicans supported this because it was going to contain infrastructure costs and allow us to have reasonable taxation rates. We're not having to pay to pave roads and maintain roads and build sewer lines and do all of the things that come along with sprawl. But how quickly we forget, and how short-term memories of politicians can be when there's a loud constituency yelling at them to make a change. So we have to be there on this urban development issues, and also with that other smart growth, better development issues. We need to stand up for land conservation. The governor and this administration are very supportive of land conservation, but we know that some of the naysayers of property rights ideologues are pressuring them on that, and if they're going to achieve their goals, they're going to have to actually not just say that they support land conservation, but put their money where their mouth is. So that's an issue, and certainly an issue on rail. We need funding, and Trip Pollard is going to talk about that during his transportation workshop. Another green community issue that I want to bring to your attention is hydraulic fracturing, Marcellus shale drilling. I'm just going to touch on this very briefly because right now it's not a major environmental threat. Well, it's an environmental threat. It's not a major source of environmental pollution currently in Virginia because we're not doing it. But there are certainly shale drillers eyeing Virginia. They've requested at least one permit, and we are seeing across the country laws pass to rescind local control over this practice. It's happened in Ohio. It's happened just 2 weeks ago in Pennsylvania. That's why we have it under our Green Communities initiative, because we believe community self-determination is extremely important. And if we educate people, they will design communities that are healthy places for Virginians to live. They will plan to protect the natural treasures in their communities if we educate them. So taking away a community's right to regulate this process or to allow or disallow this process is anathema, we think, to this principle of local land use authority that is very much a part of Virginia law and very much a part of our traditions. So this map, actually, or this diagram, actually comes from the shale drilling industry. And I think it's intended to make you feel okay, to comfort you. So it's an interesting sort of paradigm test. Does the fact that they're drilling this far underground make you feel comfortable or uncomfortable? You know, if there's what, 10 Empire State Buildings underground. I think that they want you to say, oh, it's so far away, it can't possibly hurt our water. But when I look at that, I think, well, they got to shoot water down that far into the ground, and then it gets tainted and it comes back up. So where are they going to get the clean water to shoot down there? What are they going to do with the dirty water when it comes back up with the salt and arsenic and whatever the heck else is in it? So it doesn't give me comfort, but I just found it interesting. This is actually a picture of a fracking well, I think in West Virginia. And I include that because it's important to realize what an industrial process this is and what a footprint it has on the landscape. And we can debate about whether there would be a disaster that would poison someone's well water, but there's no debate about the pollution that is associated just with building roads and pipelines at well pads like that and taking the water back out of the ground from this process. So it's a very serious issue. We have a luxury in Virginia, the fact that we were not at the front of this, we were not at the cusp of the boom like Pennsylvania, and we can learn from their experiences rather than opening the floodgates to this now by eroding local authority. So we don't have a workshop on that today. There is a white paper in your briefing book, so if you're interested in this, you want to learn more, I encourage you to read that. I wanted to include it in my remarks because I would not be surprised if we see some bad legislation on this issue, and I want you to have that awareness if you hear from us about that. All right, and our final priority, and we'll go to the breakouts next, our final priority is clean energy. And energy efficiency and renewable energy are essential to protecting Virginia's air, climate, and economy. We believe that. I know you believe that. Getting from point A to point B, however, is challenging. It's particularly challenging. It's maybe the most difficult area for us to really make progress in Virginia because of those entrenched corporate interests I was talking about at the beginning. Does this look like the face of renewable energy to you? Does anyone know who this is? So it's William Howard Taft. Believe it or not, our largest private sector utility met their renewable portfolio standard by purchasing renewable energy credits from a dam, a hydropower dam that was built during the administration of William Howard Taft, put into service in somewhere between 1901 and 1910. So something is broken here. You and I are going to have the privilege of paying out somewhere between 60 and 70 million to our utility, depending on whether we're in APCO or Dominion territory, for a renewable portfolio standard that can be met by buying a piece of paper from a dam that was built 100 years ago. And that's not the only way they're doing it. They're certainly buying it from a whole lot of hydropower facilities built before World War II. But the fact that that's allowed, and the fact that there's such a big payoff attached to it, demonstrates that something's broken. And I talked earlier about how important it is for us to be right, for us to be mathematically right. And this is a great example of an instance where, when the law passed in 2007, conservationists said, this is broken. This is not going to work. And now we've had our proceedings before the SCC. The SCC has approved some of these big payoffs, and we've learned how they're meeting the renewable portfolio standard, and we've been proven right. Those in the VCN Energy Work Group have been proven right for saying this is a bad RPS, not just because it's not mandatory, but because of a host of other things. And now we have that information, and we can take it to legislators and say, listen, ratepayers aren't going to be happy about this, and they shouldn't be happy about this because they're being fleeced. So Chelsea Harnish is going to talk about this in her workshop later today, and I won't go into detail, but this is an important issue for us. I know it's an important issue for many of you, and we've got, I think, some new insights into how the RPS is working, or rather not working, since we've had a workshop like this. So we've got great new information to share with you in that workshop. And finally, the final topic, we do not have a workshop on this issue, but we do have a white paper in your briefing book. So if you're interested in coal issues and in coal tax credits specifically, I encourage you to read that white paper. because I do hope we will see some sort of legislation on this issue, because there has been a study by JLARC, Joint Legislative Review Committee of the state, on tax credits. And what they found is what we've been telling everybody all along. Again, we were right. Historic preservation tax credits, land preservation tax credits worked really well. They achieved the goals for which they were created, and there's demonstrable success. The coal subsidies tax credit that we have on the books for $40 million a year does not achieve its goals. And this was called out specifically by it was not a conservation community study. It was not something we paid for. Totally independent General Assembly review of all tax credits. And what they found is this program is not generating any jobs. We knew that because we had this chart that's behind me in our briefing book last year that shows job decline in coal fields since the inception of this tax credit. I'm sure that the industry will argue, well, this tax credit is slowing job decline, but clearly the payoff to taxpayers is not there, and we ought to be taking that money, if we want to use it for economic development in the coal fields, we ought to be doing economic development based on the industries of the future and not the industries of the past. Because whether you are concerned about climate change or not, you have to understand that coal is a finite resource, and ultimately it's going to be mined out in central Appalachia, it's going to be mined out in Virginia, maybe within 15 years. So this is the final issue that I've got. There's our information. I encourage you to follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and definitely sign up for our email alerts because we want to keep you informed. The fact that you're here today makes you a high-value activist to us.